All right, I think we're live. I think we're live. Hello and welcome to Over Poetry.
I'm Micah. I'm a poetry enthusiast, as you could probably tell from looking at me, because I look like exactly what you would envision a poetry enthusiast to look like.
You're embodying it.
Yeah. And I think by that I mean I'm just really pale. I don't go outside much. But I'm Micah, and you are.
And I'm Few. And
And you also look very poety.
oh, thank you, thank you.
Get the beard.
Yeah, I trimmed my beard in a different sort of way, and that's been fun.
Mm.
It's been fun. All right. Well, today we are talking about one of my favorite poets, Edna St. Vincent Millay. Um, and so, yeah, Micah has done um, some biographical research on Millay. So I'll turn it over to you to give us a sketch of the life of Millay.
Thank you. I feel like Edna St. Vincent Millay, who I did not know much about, she would not have been found in poetry anthologies 40 or 50 years ago, not because like her poetry wasn't good, but I feel like there's been renewed interest in her because I think she's been sort of explored as a feminist writer more recently, and she's been seen as like a very important stepping stone between sort of Victorian romantic styles and modernist styles. So like if people don't know what those terms are, how would you define like romantic poetry?
Mm. Romantic poetry, I feel like, is very centered on the speaker
Mm-hmm.
having an experience with the senses, experiencing nature, not not really like harkening back to like old modes of poetry as much as just individualism. Really,
Mm-hmm.
that's how I'd say it.
And then modernism, like when I think of modernism, I think of like T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, Philip Larkin. Like the speaker, it can be rhymed. It's not always rhymed. It's often kind of disillusioned, like it's coming after the world wars. It's typically about this disintegration of the former social order. Not always explicitly, but there is a sense in which the traditional social values, their disintegration is mirrored by sort of reaction against the traditional poetic forms. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Very experimental, very much trying to break the mold and really just trying to break down what is the essence of poetry. And I feel like all art
Mm-hmm.
forms went through this modernistic, experimental thing like dance has and
Mm-hmm.
art,
Visual art for
visual
sure.
art. Yeah. So,
Film. I mean, I think the world wars were just a really big upheaval that really signaled that transition. I mean, and so again, we've got Romanticism, which is like the 1800s, so the 19th century, and then Modernism, which really defines the 20th century. And then we've got Anna St. Vincent Millay smack in the middle. Um,
hmm,
and so I think people have struggled to know like how to categorize her because she doesn't fit clearly into one category or the other because she takes from some romantic styles. A lot of her poetry is about nature. It's very introspective. It's rhymed in kind of a traditional way, but there are modernist elements. I mean, like the fact that she is known primarily as a Roaring Twenties poet, I think is because she espouses a lot of unconventional feminist views. Like, and
sure.
she in that period of time was kind of the model for like the bisexual young female, like Greenwich Village. There's a Greenwich Village. Greenwich Village
I
poet.
liked it.
I was rhyming. I was trying to be anyway. So I think she's hard to categorize. And I think she would kind of like that because she was kind of that way in her life. Like I don't know. Millay is often, again, labeled as a Roaring Twenties poet, and there's this whole article about her on like poetry. The Poetry Foundation did this whole article about her.
Hmm.
So it says that she kind of embodied the post-war feelings of young people, meaning like a rebellion against tradition, a mood of freedom. Um, she denigrated prudence, respectability, constancy, like famous lines like "My candle burns at both ends. I am not faithful to a vow. I will forget you." Like in a lot of her poems, like especially if she's like in a love poem, it's not implied that the two characters are going to settle down and get married and have a traditional life. In fact, in the one I'm going to read, it's very much not that. Like she is rejecting the other person. So again, I think a lot of that is borne out in her personal life.
Hmm.
So she's born again, kind of at the very tail end of the 1800s. So tail end of the Victorian period in 1892. She's raised by a single mom in America, and I think her mom sacrifices for her daughters like really impacted Edna St. Vincent Millay because she does dwell on the image of like the hardworking, self-sacrificing mom a lot, especially in the collection The Harp Weaver, which won the Pulitzer Prize.
Hmm.
So Millay, her mom, her two sisters. I mean, there was a dad in the picture, obviously, but they got divorced when the children were pretty little, and the mom actually worked as a nurse, I believe, and they tended to move around a lot, and they were relatively poor, like not like Dickensian, like there was always music, they always had money, like enough to eat, but the idea of like a formal education was kind of out of reach. But that might also be not just a poverty thing, but also like a sexism thing because
Mm.
it wasn't as common then for women to pursue higher education. But then all that changes when she's 20 years old and she has her first big success with the poem Renaissance, which
Yes,
is all
yes.
about. Do you want to tell them what it's about?
Uh, sure. So, Renaissance is this long poem where the speaker, I mean, basically comes in contact with the sublime and like goes through
Mm-hmm.
death and rebirth and a lot of different cycles. It was a poem that was entered into a contest.
Mm-hmm.
From what I remember, she did not win that contest, and that upset a lot of people. They were like,
They
she
felt like she
was
should
the
have won.
clear winner of that contest, and so that started to spur her. That started her, poetic um, reputation, I suppose. That's what I
Yeah.
remember about it.
But something good did come about it from it, even though she didn't actually win the contest.
Right.
At least not first place. But the poem did catch the attention of Miss Caroline Dow, who was very wealthy, and she thought Millay had talent, and she actually paid for Millay to go to college at Vassar,
Oh,
which
okay.
pretty bougie. Um, which is it's just like the crazy coincidence that she heard of the poem and that she was like, "Hey, I've got money, I want to pay." Anyway, it's just crazy coincidence. But Millay is like, "Awesome," but it's not smooth sailing because she's not a conventional person. Like her mom, raised by a single mom, they had to kind of do a lot of things for themselves, and so Anna St. Vincent Millay, like she smokes, she drinks, like she hangs out with guys all the time, and at Vassar, like that's against the rules. You're not allowed to have male guests over, like outside of a very specific time. You're not allowed to smoke. You're not allowed to drink. And so the faculty actually try to kick her out, like her senior year, but the other students petitioned to have her reinstated and be allowed to graduate.
Wow. Okay.
Hmm. So she's obviously somewhat popular, right? If they were like voting and like petitioning the faculty to let her back in, right?
Right. Right.
Which I think goes to show like she was a very charming person. Not just like in her poetry is very charming, but like in her real life, like in an interpersonal level, she was also very charming. So then, after she graduates, she like single-handedly, I think, forms the poetic stereotype for women. Like she moves to Greenwich Village, and she's very openly bisexual, which I just find so fascinating. And she's writing about it too. Like she's not hiding at all, and she writes really, really feminist work under her own name. It's like all about women's rights, but she did also like publish some short stories that were more mainstream
Hmm.
and more like adventure stories, but she didn't publish them under her own name because she didn't want people to know that she was like hard up for money and that she needed like to pay the rent. And she
Sure.
published those under the name Nancy Boyd. I think she didn't want people to think she was like compromising her artistic standards,
Sure.
but she
Sure.
also needed to like eat. So anyway, then in 1921, oh, during that time she's got there's like this huge love triangle between a couple of people, but she's not really serious. All these men are like pursuing her, and she's not really. She doesn't want to settle down. Is very much the sense that I got. She doesn't really want to. I don't think she's never eager to like become her mom because her mom, whom she loves, but she saw, I think, her mom's sacrifice for her daughters. I think Edna St. Vincent Millay's like, nope, that's not for me. I just want to do my poetry. But
I wanna
then,
add in that like she definitely did see those sacrifices, especially because she was like the oldest sibling.
yeah,
And so when her mom would have to like go and work long hours, like Malay was the one like taking care of her younger sisters and like making sure they got the food they needed and like trying to get them to go to bed and stuff like that, which you know as a normal sibling would do. They rebel against their older
hmm
sibling trying to tell them what to do. So like she knew definitely firsthand, like more than any of her siblings, what the mom sacrificed, and it definitely had a big impact on her.
yeah, I think she definitely had oldest daughter syndrome. Like they say, like they experience so much they have so much responsibility, and it's simultaneously a big part of their identity, but also they kind of resent it, but also I don't know, it's complicated, right? It's complicated.
Yeah.
So in 1921, I think all of that comes like sort of culminates. So she's in Paris, she's doing her artistic stuff, she's seeing sculptures, and she's like hobnobbing with like powerful, successful women, and then she gets pregnant. And she returns home, and apparently her mother helps her induce an abortion with alkanut, which is like
Mm-hmm.
Wikipedia says it's like an herb. Like it can refer to like a bunch of different compounds, but apparently it's super dangerous. Like, and she is sick for like literally years after. And she never has any kids of her own. And part of me wonders if like part of that might just have been by choice, but I wonder if like she was like physically injured as a result of taking these herbs and trying to induce an abortion. But I don't know.
Okay. Wow. Wow. Um.
That's a lot of speculation on my part, but she definitely did. Like she wrote letters about, uh, what happened. So that is definitely for sure. But the effect that that had on her marriage, I don't know. That's my personal speculation.
Okay. Okay. I got a little distracted by the chat. They're letting me know that I'm kind of quiet, so I'm gonna hold the mic closer to my face because that usually
Okay.
fixes it. So
Do I need to be quieter?
no, 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 you're good. I can adjust sound things on my end if I need to. You just keep
Okay.
doing you.
Okay. So abortion and then being very sick. That's 1921. And then in 1923, she turns that pain into a Pulitzer Prize winning poetry collection, The Harpweaver. And then that same year, so when she's like 31, she marries Eugene Jean Beausavant, who was a widower of one of Millay's heroes, Inez Milholland, who was apparently a very famous feminist. He was like older; he's 43, so there was kind of an age gap there. And Wikipedia, I'm literally quoting from Wikipedia, which says both Millay and Beausavant had other lovers throughout their 26-year marriage. For Millay, one such significant relationship was with the poet George Dillon, a student 14 years her junior, whom she met in 1928 at one of her readings at the University of Chicago. Their relationship
Wow.
inspired the sonnets and the collection Fatal Interview, which she published in 1931. But again, there was no children resulting from the affair. And she stayed married to her husband he obviously knew about the affair. Like she was not a person given to secrecy. I have no idea how that would have worked. I don't know. I think she and her husband loved each other. Like they obviously loved each other a great deal, but she was like it seems too simplistic to say oh, she was a free spirit. Like she just
Sure, sure.
free, unconventional woman. Like I don't know. I don't know. All of that sounds like I'm trying to justify her cheating or something, but it's not that the normal rules don't apply to her, but I do think there was well, whatever I can say about it is not my place to enter judgment. But anyway, a really
Um,
great poetry volume came out of it.
yeah. So I was reading a book that has some of her diary entries in it.
Hmm.
Um, and like it was really interesting this one entry when she's like a teenager and she's like talking about religion and I don't remember the exact details, but the vibe I got was that she's not she's not prone to listen to dogma, you know?
Right.
Like she's just she does what she feels is right and tries to be good to people, you know. And like so like her morals not aligning with Christianity at that time or you know or whatever. That seems right. Like
Yeah.
she's I mean, yeah, like she's got an open marriage, she's got lots of lovers, like that's she she's just acting as with what she feels is right. I mean, that seems to fit.
Yeah, and I feel like in her poetry, like she expresses a connection with like divinity, like in
Right.
nature and like some kind of higher power. But
Yeah.
sometimes she explicitly says God, but
Yeah.
also she that doesn't translate to what I would think of like as conventional Christian values.
There's this there's this one poem, I don't remember what it's called, but she's like being led to heaven with a bunch of
Hmm.
people and she just is like mourning like losing all
Yes, I
their
love
earth
that one.
things. Right, right.
She's like, I don't want to go to heaven. None of my stuff is there.
Yeah. So, okay, cool, cool. Anything else you
What?
wanted to bring up with Millay?
I should probably talk about how she died, right?
Yeah, yeah, let's talk about that.
So she dies. She's 58. Her husband precedes her by like a year, and she was dealing actually with a lot of chronic pain before she died. So her poetic output did slow down. She got like thrown out of a car
Oh, wow.
accidentally and like injured her back pretty badly. So her poetic output slows down, I think, but partially because of that. But she also like she continues to write poetry throughout her life, which I think is really impressive. Like
Yeah.
she produces a pretty startling amount of work, which I think is just cool. Like not only I mean she's an icon first of all of the Roaring Twenties, but also she's kind of this fascinating bridge between like poetic movements. Also, again, I think I really admire her perseverance. Like she had a lot happen in her life, and she does write about kind of the pain and the sickness she suffered because of the abortion and the chronic illness towards the end of her life. But I think throughout all that, she keeps writing, and I don't know. I think that's a model of perseverance that I could learn something from.
That's fascinating. So in reading some of like her diaries or whatever, like she's got friends that are like getting her to write in her journal or whatever, and
Hmm.
she feels bad when she doesn't keep it up.
Hmm.
Um, and so during her teenage years, she wrote a lot, and then later on, she wrote a lot, probably in her 30s or so. But then, like near the end of her life, all her journal entries were basically just her keeping track of how much pain medication she was taking.
Hmm.
which, yeah, makes sense with what you said. Um, okay, well, should we get into the poems? Looking at a
Yeah.
couple poems. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, great. So I'm gonna start. The poem I chose is "Afternoon on a Hill." Okay, I'm gonna read it now. I will be the gladdest thing under the sun. I will touch 100 flowers and not pick one. I will look at cliffs and clouds with quiet eyes, watch the wind bow down the grass and the grass rise. And when lights begin to show up from the town, I will mark which must be mine and then start down. Okay. Um,
What stands out to you about this?
um, okay, so I'm putting on the screen a scansion of this poem. Okay. Micah, I wish you could see this. Maybe I can actually message it to you.
Okay.
Um, I think this poem is an immortal poem that will live throughout all time. Um, like I I'm so impressed by this poem. Um, okay, so yeah, so looking at the structure of this poem real quick, um, we've got we've got lines of 7 syllables, 4 syllables, 7 syllables, 4 syllables, and that's the makeup of each stanza. Um, each of the 7 syllable lines, they would normally be 6 syllable lines, but she's doing this poetic technique called anacrusis, which is where you add an extra unaccented syllable to the beginning.
Hmm.
And this is
It's
done
super hard to do.
right. Like it's so she's done it with every single, 7 syllable line. Um, and I think that just like adds to the urgency of the poem. Like
Hmm.
it's not urgent as in like there's danger, but it's urgent and like eager to like, grab the bull by the horns. Ah, that's so cliche, but you know what I mean. It's like,
No, it feels very alive. It feels
yes,
like there's a steady energy.
yeah, it feels so alive. And I also admire the way that she uses little substitutions in this
Mhm.
poem. There's only one 4 syllable line that has no alterations, like no metrical substitutions, and that's with quiet eyes. But the other ones, I feel like these trochaic substitutions, under the sun, up from the town, like I feel like these also add to the eagerness, the aliveness, the vivacity um, of the spirit of this poem. Um,
I think I just, well, if anyone doesn't know what a trochee is that's listening, a
oh,
trochee
thank
is
you, thank
like,
you.
so normally poetic lines are divided up into accented versus unaccented syllables. Accented just means more air comes out of your mouth when you say it, right? So, like in the line, I will be the gladdest thing, be is accented versus I will, they're not accented. So you have sort of this unaccented 2 syllables, I will, and then the accented be. But that changes in the next line, under the sun, because instead of having unaccented and then accented, it becomes accented with under. So that like variation is really, it's just very sophisticated.
Right, right. And this is coming from an English tradition of poetry where iambic pentameter is the norm,
Hmm.
where you go da 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 da. And so, I mean, metrical substitutions happen all the time in iambic pentameter um, poetry, and Millay here is doing it really well with this sort of. common meter poem. It's not quite
Mhm.
common meter though. Um, anyways, let's
But it
see.
feels like Emily Dickinson a little bit, you know?
That's
It
true.
feel it feels a little bit. Ah, okay, I feel like normally I'm not a nature poem person. Like I love nature, but nature poetry just isn't my jam. But I have to make an exception for some of Edna St. Vincent Millay's poetry because she has this genuine reverence for nature. And I
Right.
think that that is accentuated by poems like this, which is it's not written exactly like a hymn, but kind of, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so yeah, the trochaic substitutions are great. The spondaic substitutions are also really potent. Like I love how each stanza ends, the rhythm of the four syllable
Hmm.
line. And I've got to tell you too, like I'm a sucker for four syllable lines. Like you put that in any sort of metrical poem, a four syllable line, and it can have like a big punch. Like Shakespeare would often like split up his lines into fours and sixes and sometimes just
Hmm.
end on four syllables for no reason. It's just so good. Um I don't even know why, but I'm very fond of it. Sorry, that was going on at length.
No, I think it's interesting.
But yeah, at the end of each of these stanzas, Millay uses a spondy to like slow things down. You know, we start off each stanza with that anacrusis, the da da da, um, to just like speed things up, and then we slow it down with a spondy, um, which is just so good. It's so satisfying. Um, and it's not the same every time either. There's just like little variations. With this, I do the unaccented syllables with a U, accented syllables with a shoot. Is it called a backslash or a forward slash?
I never know.
I never
Just
know either. Uh, right leaning slash is accented, and then left leaning slashes. These are a sort of concession to how language does not neatly fall into iambs or
hmm.
accented, unaccented. And so sometimes there are like middling um, versions. And so whenever I find something like that, I kind of put like the the left leaning slash. So so yeah. Um I just think this is an immortal poem. I think it captures a very human feeling of just wanting to like enjoy life, enjoy nature.
Hmm.
Um, and just like I don't know, it's I can't reduce it down. It just catches it just captures that very lovely feeling. So
It's deceptively simple.
that
Like,
absolutely.
I you wouldn't think this poem would be as immortal because it's like on the surface, like, oh, it's just about she's sitting on a hill admiring nature, but it evokes a feeling of, I think, tranquility that is hard to capture. Like it's hard to write a compelling, tranquil, calm poem. It's easy to write poetry about conflict, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
because that has drama to it, that has stakes. It's a lot harder and therefore more impressive when someone does it when someone writes an engaging poem about calm,
Yeah,
in my opinion.
if there's like a happy poem that's just like the poster child for happy poems, I feel like this is it, you know.
Hmm.
It's just it's lovely. Um, the rhythms really like drive home the points. Um, and I don't know of a poem that starts off more strongly, which is funny because it's kind of breaking the rules, you know. It's like starting with an abstraction.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that I mean it's working somehow. it's working somehow.
It is.
So there you go. This is the poem I've been obsessing with for a month and a half. I've basically committed it to memory at this point. It's just, yeah, it will never die, in my opinion. So
Nor should it.
there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so on to your poem now.
I
Let's let me
chose
pull that
Sonnet
up.
41. Am I reading the Roman numerals right?
Yeah, yeah, 41.
It's also known by its first line, I, being born a woman and distressed, which I love that a positive phrase right off, like describing herself. I don't know, it's so dramatic. This is like a quintessential flapper poem, you know, like a flapper. How do you describe a flapper? It's like a 1920s like young woman who was known for being like rebelling against traditional femininity, right?
Right.
Like think bobbed hair, chain smoking, dancing. I don't know. I know that's just like a stereotype, but like Edna St. Millay was actually a flapper.
I mean, I
Um,
feel like it's a stereotype, but it's what they would embody themselves. You know, it's like saying
right.
a cavalier is someone with long hair who played sports on Sunday in England in the 1600s. It's a
Hmm.
stereotype, but like that's what they went for. That's what they liked.
Right. And I think what makes this poem super like consistent with flapper, it feels weird to say flapper ideals, like that shows um, how emblematic she was of the 1920s is like in this like lover's quarrel that she's expressing, or not a quarrel, but like it's very clear that she doesn't need the other person. Like she it's very confident, it's very forward, it's very assertive about her own value. And she identifies herself as a woman. So like as a woman in a relationship, she doesn't need the relationship. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
Nice.
I'll read it. I, being born a woman and distressed by all the needs and notions of my kind, am urged by your propinquity, which, if you don't know, because I didn't know what that word meant, it means like proximity. So,
Mm.
by your proximity, to find your person fair and feel a certain zest to bear your body's weight upon my breast, which is like, woo, hey, that's very forward.
Oh
So
yeah.
subtly is the fume of life designed to clarify the pulse and cloud the mind, and leave me once again undone, possessed. Think not for this, however, the poor treason of my stout blood against my staggering brain. I shall remember you with love, or season my scorn with pity. Let me make it plain. I find this frenzy insufficient reason for conversation when we meet again. So she's like rejecting the other person. She's like, I think you're attractive, but I don't need you, which
Right.
is very confident, I think.
I love Malay. Like I love how she describes love and its fleeting nature. Just yeah. I mean, because she's talking about wanting this person, like
Hmm.
feel a certain zest to bear your body's weight upon my breast, like you said, like very forward. Um, oh, this is so great. Think not for this, however, the poor treason of my stout blood against my staggering brain. Um, yeah, the- I'm just reading lines again and loving them. You keep going, keep talking about this poem, Micah.
No, she's got some great imagery. Like I want to savor it too. Like I think she does have a gift. She has got a gift for description. Like as you described, she's got a gift for meter too. But I'm not really a meter person. But what I can appreciate is some of the descriptions because I think they're just so fitting. Like this isn't this poem, but like in another poem, she describes like a bare hilltop as like the cap of a skull, and I'm like, this I would never have thought of that in a million years. But it's a great description. Anyway, about this poem, I think the rhyme is subtle. Well, it's not. I mean, it's like and rhyme, so it's not that subtle. But like, there's variation, it's not over the top. It's very well done. Like it's very sophisticated. And then she's got kind of that slant rhyme at the end with plain and then again. Obviously, they don't really rhyme, but they kind of, there's sort of that slant rhyme going on.
What's
And
lovely
you,
about that slant rhyme is just, I mean, is that the only slant rhyme? I think it might be. Um, I'm going to pretend it is and say that you can read that as her saying, we don't actually match, you
right.
know?
Like we're not really a pair. We don't rhyme.
Right, right.
That's so, I hadn't thought about that. See if she's thinking in 4D, four dimensions over here.
Right, right.
But yeah, I definitely think this is a quintessential, like, if there were ever to be an anthology of flapper poetry, I think this needs to be poem number one. Because it's very assertive about her femininity, and it's very, like, forward and bold about expressing, like, even though she's a woman, like, she still feels attraction. She's not shy about expressing that, which I think traditional femininity, at least in Western culture, would be a woman would be less open and expressive about that, but she does not abide by that. Like she's very expressive, but also she's very independent. And at the end, like she acknowledges how powerful her emotions are, but her independence is more important than this fleeting emotion. Which I just think is the Flapper Manifesto, like being a Flapper 101. And I think it's cool.
Yeah. Oh, it's very interesting. I'm trying to think of other examples of women writing sonnets, and I
Mm-hmm.
think of Elizabeth Barrett Browning and her sonnets from the Portuguese, which are super lovely, but very much like focused on one person. You have
Right.
one receiver of those poems, whereas these are
They're a little bit
kind.
more demure.
Yeah, yeah. But then her sonnets are often, talking about her having these little love affairs, almost kind of like a sonneteer, like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they often write of unrequited love, and I suppose she's writing of unrequiting love, or like using
Mm-hmm.
love short term or whatever. Um, some of her sonnets, though, really lean into love, though. Just like talking about, there's this one where she talks about not being able to survive without love, which sounds super cliche, but she makes it sound really good. Um,
Well, she's this fascinating paradox of a person. Like she's the oldest daughter who like craves responsibility, but also eschews responsibility, runs away from responsibility. She is, the independent free spirit who's also in a 30-year marriage. Eh, she's just a lot of things. I don't know. She's paradoxical. She's Victorian, but also and romantic, but she's also kind of modernist in some way, or like foreshadowing modernism. She's a lot of two things. And I think, I guess that goes back to my earlier point. Like, I think people have a hard time knowing where to put her, like, and label her, because she doesn't neatly fit.
yeah, it is so interesting. Like, the thing is that poets are just out there writing poetry, and they
Yeah.
might try something new. They might even try to join a movement, but a lot of times they just, I don't know, they write however appeals to them, and then historians or literary scholars later, are like, oh, these are, you know, themes that go together. And it's very fun to group poets together, for sure. Um, okay, so wait, question, because this whole talk about modernism or not,
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what you think of Robert Frost. Because I feel like these
Oh,
two are like, feel like they're contemporaries.
No,
Um,
they definitely, yeah, they are.
and I don't know like how much interaction these two had, if they had any, but Millay was an extremely popular poet in her time. Like,
Hmm.
they say her poetry was like the anthem of a generation.
Hmm.
And Robert Frost was also popular, though he, like, you know, he wasn't a roaring 20s poet. But, anyways, I just thought I'd bring up Robert Frost as a contemporary.
Also, a poet, in my opinion, who people struggle to categorize because, like, he writes a. I wouldn't describe, like, Ezra Pound admired his poetry, but he wasn't really doing what Ezra Pound was doing, you know?
Right, right.
He was quietly revolutionary in his own way because he, like, elevated, I think, like, everyday conversation in a way that
Right.
hadn't previously been done in America. But yeah, he's not. He's just really hard to label. So I think that's a great comparison. They're both really hard to label
I
and
mean,
both very iconic.
you can't throw out Robert Frost. He's just like, he was too big.
He was the American poet. Yeah.
Yeah. But then Millay was also really big. And it's interesting how, like, I don't know, like you said, she's been forgotten in some ways.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, there is a resurgence. I'm just really glad that the first anthology I read had some of her poetry in it, because that's how I got introduced to her, was just reading through an anthology of poetry. Um, so 1920s influencer. That's right, Scott. Um, okay. Well, cool. Uh, okay,
Do you have a writing
so
prompt for us?
a writing prompt. Um, my writing prompt goes something like this. Anyone who wants to pick up this writing prompt, I invite you to write some sort of poem that would be the anthem of your generation.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Like, what, if you could put to words what you think drives your generation forward, how you buck back against tradition, or, whatever, like, what is unique about your generation situation that you could put into words that you feel like could drive your generation to do something. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so now we'll do our outro. Stay immersed yourselves in the whims of verse to not fall heretic to the wiles of your prosaic lives. Goodbye.